Chapter 2. The Architecture of Order. Episode 1. New Arrangements in the Dreamwilds. Scene 1. When the morning began to count.
Morning no longer arrived the way it used to. Once, dawn in the Dreamwilds had been a negotiation between light and life. Birds deciding when to sing, leaves when to stir, sleepers when to wake. Now, the forest held its breath, waiting. The sound came first. Gong? It rolled across the heart clearing like a command rather than a greeting. Deep, metallic, utterly foreign, the note did not echo. It asserted itself, complete and final. Gong? Creatures stirred, not because they were ready, but because the sound insisted they should be. At the center of the heart clearing stood the clock. It rose on a narrow metal pedestal, taller than a deer, its surface polished to a dull, reflective sheen that caught no warmth from the sun. Its face bore no ornament, no symbols of seasons or stars, only stark divisions, precise and equal. Arkhon had said he had found it, half buried in the ruins of an older world, and restored it with care. He spoke of it as one might speak of a rescued relic, but the Dreamwilds did not remember it. Hedgehogs woke at the first strike, blinking in confusion as their bodies obeyed before hunger had spoken. Squirrels gathered their nuts in neat bundles during the hours allotted for gathering, then stopped, abruptly, when the second signal rang, even if the trees were still generous. Movement began to cluster into patterns, pauses into slots. Time had learned to march. Beneath it all, the world's bass hum had changed. The old, breathing resonance, organic and tidal, had flattened into a low, steady pulse, synchronized with the clock's mechanism. The land no longer swayed, it ticked. The change spread outward in lines. Ropes had appeared where none had been before, strung carefully between stakes driven into living soil. Signs hung from them, carved with deliberate clarity. Zone I, secured area. Zone 2, permit required. The borders did not glow, they did not threaten, they simply stood there, undeniable. Paths narrowed, meadows learned edges. When the three stood before the great map Arkhon had unfurled, the world seemed suddenly smaller. He gestured with an open hand, calm and precise, as though explaining a kindness. Chaos thrives in the unmarked, he said, his voice steady, intimate, untouched by the forest's acoustics. When everything is named and bordered, harm has nowhere left to hide. His finger traced clean lines across the parchment. Heartlands, northern shadows, the western transitions. Each zone rendered legible, contained. This, he continued, is prevention. Thinks he felt her light hesitate, its silver rhythm faltering against the imposed order. Lucy noticed how the glowing meadow beyond the clearing still shone. But no longer freely. Its lights pulse now, obediently, in time with the distant strikes of the clock. Even Teddy, who understood the comfort of systems, felt the faint unease of something vital being translated into measure. Gong? The sound carried again, steady and patient, and the Dreamwilds, once a place that woke itself, opened its eyes on schedule.
Scene 2. The gentle weight of watching.
Arkhon had not brought soldiers. This fact was repeated often, and with care, until it settled into the Dreamwilds like a reassurance one stopped questioning. Instead, he had looked among them. The announcement came at the heart clearing, beneath the unblinking clock. Arkhon spoke of shared responsibility, of local knowledge, of how safety grew strongest when it was rooted in familiar hands. His words moved easily through the crowd, warm in tone, precise in meaning. When he placed the title of Border Warden upon Grumpy, there was a murmur of approval. Grumpy, solid, square-shouldered, older than most of the paths he guarded, accepted the role without hesitation. He stepped forward, planted his mallet into the ground, and struck once, firmly. "No more surprises," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I'll see to that." The sound of wood meeting earth carried farther than expected. It felt final. From that day on, Grumpy stood at the rope boundaries as though they had always been meant to be there. He measured crossings with his eyes, asked questions that had once been unnecessary, and nodded only when answers aligned with the new rules. He did not feel cruel, he felt useful. Elsewhere, patrols began to move. Puss in Boots was given a cloak. Dark, official, trimmed with a sigil he had never worn before. The title head of security sounded almost theatrical, and for a brief moment it stirred something old in him, but the weight of the fabric was different from a cape of adventure. It settled his shoulders downward, not back. He walked the Dreamwilds with a ledger now, no longer leaping rooftops or chasing rumors for the thrill of it. He paced measured routes, ears pricked for irregularities. He paused to write notes where none had ever been needed. Unusual wind pattern near the glowing meadow, movement after curfew. Possibly foxes. The act of recording gave shape to his vigilance. It made concern feel productive. The change was subtle, but it spread quickly. Before, if something felt wrong, you helped, you asked, you stayed. Now, you reported. A rustle in the undergrowth became an item to be logged. A worried glance was redirected toward procedure. Care was no longer an instinct. It was a task assigned elsewhere. The Dreamwilds did not feel oppressed, not yet. They felt managed. Grumpy stood straighter, proud of the order taking form beneath his watch. Puss in Boots walked his routes with purpose, convinced that attention itself was a form of love. Neither noticed the shape emerging around them, a structure built not of walls, but of trust redirected away from one another, and into the waiting hands of the system. And beneath it all, the clock continued its patient count, marking not only time, but compliance.
Scene 3. The form before the embrace.
The tent appeared overnight. It stood at the edge of the heart clearing, pale canvas stretched tight over a frame of polished poles. Above its entrance hung a carefully lettered sign, "Requests for assistance." The words were calm, almost kind. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ink and dried herbs. Tables had been arranged in rows, each bearing stacks of neatly aligned sheets. Nothing was broken here, nothing was bleeding, and yet, something essential felt held at a distance. Lucy noticed it first. She noticed everything first. When the small mouse came running, eyes wide, breath uneven, voice trembling with the residue of a nightmare, Lucy moved without thought. Her hands were already reaching, her body bending low, her light softening into the familiar warmth that had soothed countless fears before this one. "It's all right," she began. A gentle hand intercepted her path. The Sentinel smiled. "Just a moment, Lucy," he said, his tone smooth, rehearsed, almost apologetic. "We need to document this first." The mouse hesitated, paws clutched to his chest. The Sentinel crouched to his level, producing a slate and stylus. "Now then," was the nightmare recurring? The mouse blinked, and on a scale of 1 to 5, the Sentinel continued, still smiling, "How intense would you say the distress felt?" Lucy froze. Her arms hovered, empty. Behind them, Arkhon watched with measured approval. When Lucy turned to him, confusion and hurt flickering across her face, he spoke gently. As one does when correcting a misunderstanding. "If we respond to every cry immediately," he said, "you will exhaust yourselves. Compassion without structure burns out. We must prioritize." He gestured toward the papers. "Severe cases will reach you. The rest can be addressed through guided peer support circles." The words were careful, reasonable, efficient. The mouse was led to a small stool. A sheet was placed before him. He sniffed, wiping his nose with the back of his paw, trying to remember details that now felt distant and unreal. The nightmare began to fade. Not because it had been soothed, but because it was being translated. Lucy stood very still. Every part of her wanted to kneel, to gather the mouse into her arms, to let the fear dissolve against her chest as it always had, but another part of her, trained by years of harmony, of keeping balance, of pleasing, whispered that Arkhon must be right. She lowered her hands. Later, the healers would sit together, reviewing summaries instead of stories. They would be praised for efficiency, for clarity, for resilience. They would become overseers of care rather than participants in it. Chief physicians of a system that no longer required their presence. And the Dreamwilds learned a new lesson, that before comfort, there was procedure, that before empathy, there was a form, and that even the kindest hearts could be taught to wait.